Imagine the darkness that falls over the French countryside. Not the gentle dark of a modern city with its electric hum and distant traffic, but a true, profound, and absolute dark. A dark where the only light comes from the flicker of a hearth fire, and the only sounds are the rustle of unseen things in the forest and the lonely cry of a wolf miles away, or perhaps much, much closer. This is the 16th century in the region of Franche-Comté, a place where the woods were deep, the winters were cruel, and the line between man and monster was not just a folk tale whispered to children, but a genuine, blood-soaked fear. In the autumn of 1572, that fear took a name etched into the annals of the macabre not as legend, but as legal fact, the name of Gilles Garnier, the Werewolf of Dôle. Our story begins not with a beast, but with a man, a hermit named Gilles Garnier, a figure on the fringes of society who lived in a tumble-down hut on the outskirts of the village of Dôle near the treacherous forests of Serre. He was, by all accounts, a solitary and pitiable figure, poor, uneducated, and married to a blind woman, together scratching out a meager existence from the unforgiving land. But in 1572, something changed in Gilles. The desperation of poverty seemed to curdle into something far darker, a shift that would soon cast a long and terrifying shadow over the entire region and mark him for a fate worse than death. The first whispers of terror began in the late autumn when a young girl tending her family's livestock near the woodline vanished without a trace. A frantic search by the villagers yielded nothing but a trampled patch of grass and a few chilling drops of blood, leaving the community on edge but blaming wild animals or roving bandits. Then it happened again, this time to a boy no more than 10 years old sent to gather firewood as the sun began to set. He never returned, and when his body was found, the village's fear solidified into pure terror, for the boy had not simply been killed, but ravaged, his throat torn out and great strips of flesh ripped from his bones by powerful jaws.
Panic spread through the region like a poison as parents kept their children locked indoors after noon, and men ventured into the fields only in armed groups, their eyes constantly scanning the dark, brooding tree line. The local authorities organized hunts, but found no pack of wolves, no bear, no natural explanation for the savagery they had witnessed. The attacks were too precise, too personal, as if the beast was hunting not for food, but for sport, a behavior that defied the logic of the natural world and began to point towards something supernatural, something intelligent and malevolent. A crucial turning point came when a young witness, a girl who had been playing near a thicket, came forward with a story that was at first dismissed as a childish fantasy. She spoke of seeing a large, dark animal shaped like a wolf, but walking like a man, lurking near the scene of one of the attacks, and her account planted a seed of dread that quickly grew. The word was soon spoken in hushed, terrified tones in the taverns and around the hearths, the dreaded word Loup-garou, or werewolf, giving a name and a shape to the formless fear that had gripped the people of Dôle. The paranoia reached a peak pitch where every stranger was viewed with suspicion and every odd sound in the night was the beast coming for its next victim, and the people, living in a waking nightmare, demanded a monster to blame. Their gaze inevitably fell upon the one man who lived apart from them, the hermit, the outsider, Gilles Garnier, as rumors began to coalesce around his gaunt, hungry appearance and the fact he was often seen skulking around the forest's edge at odd hours with a strange, feral look in his eyes. It was the testimony of another child that finally sealed Gilles Garnier's fate. A young boy claimed that while being attacked by a monstrous creature, he had been saved by a group of men who happened upon the scene, and in the struggle, the beast was wounded before it fled into the woods.
The description the boy gave was of a creature that was neither fully wolf nor fully man, a hybrid of nightmare, and this account, combined with the growing suspicion around the hermit, gave the authorities the evidence they needed to act, leading to the arrest of Gilles Garnier and his wife. The interrogation of Gilles Garnier, preserved in chilling detail in the historical transcripts from the archives of Franche-Comté, was not a modern trial, but an inquisition, where the goal was not to determine if a crime had been committed, but to extract a confession for a crime they already believed he was guilty of. He was questioned for days under the threat of torture, isolated, sleep-deprived, and confronted with the horrifying details of the crimes, a psychological and physical breaking process designed to force a specific narrative of guilt. At first, Garnier denied everything, insisting he was just a poor, simple hermit, but the pressure was relentless, as his questioners, steeped in a worldview where demonic pacts and supernatural transformations were accepted reality, guided him. They did not ask if he was a werewolf, they asked how he became one and who he made his pact with, presenting him with the eyewitness accounts, the location of his hut, and his own poverty as evidence of his damnation, offering him a dark and terrible story to confess to. His confession, when it finally came, was a masterpiece of horror that fit perfectly with the contemporary werewolf lore, a narrative likely fed to him during his ordeal. He told them a specter, a phantom, had appeared to him in the forest in his desperation, and he had made a bargain with this dark spirit, receiving a foul magical salve in return for the power to sate his hunger. He described rubbing this substance onto his body, triggering a terrible transformation, where his hands would curl into claws, his teeth would elongate into fangs, and hair would sprout from his skin, turning him into a wolf possessed of a wolf's strength and savagery, but retaining a man's cunning and malice. Garnier confessed to the murders in gruesome, specific detail, describing the stalking of the children, the thrill of the hunt, and the taste of their flesh, admitting to killing the young girl and the boy, and attacking several others, even speaking of dragging their bodies into the bushes to devour them at his leisure. This confession was not just an admission of guilt, but a performance, a script written by his inquisitors and recited by a broken man, providing the terrified populace in the court with the exact supernatural explanation they needed to make sense of this senseless violence. With his confession secured, the trial moved swiftly to its inevitable conclusion, finding Gilles Garnier guilty of the crimes of lycanthropy, witchcraft, and murder, with the sentence being death by fire. The court, in its grim wisdom, added a specific stipulation that before he was burned, he was to be subjected to the question extraordinaire, the torture of the rack, to force him to name any accomplices, any other witches or werewolves he might know, revealing the deep-seated paranoia that believed he could not be the only monster lurking among them.
There is no historical record of Garnier naming anyone else under torture, suggesting his spirit was finally completely broken, or that he had nothing left to confess, and he was then prepared for public execution. The people of Dôle and the surrounding villages gathered in the public square, a sea of fearful, angry, and morbidly curious faces, all there to see the monster who had haunted their nightmares be purged from their world through ritual fire, an event meant to purify the community and restore order. Gilles Garnier was let out, a gaunt and broken figure, and forced to publicly repeat his confession, to reaffirm the reality of his diabolical transformation for all to hear before being tied to a stake atop a pyre of wood and straw. As the flames were lit and began to climb, the crowd watched, their faces illuminated by the hellish glow, hearing his screams and smelling the burning flesh, witnessing the physical form of the werewolf of Dôle be consumed, believing they were witnessing the destruction of a literal monster. But the story of Gilles Garnier forces us to ask a terrifying question. What were they really burning that day? Was it a genuine shape-shifting monster, a man who believed so utterly in his own curse that he manifested the beast within? Or was he simply a desperately poor, mentally ill man, a convenient scapegoat for a series of tragic crimes? His confession bears all the hallmarks of a coerced statement, filled with tropes from contemporary folklore that his interrogators would have expected to hear, making it difficult to discern any underlying truth beyond the fact that children were dead and a community was terrified.
The historical context of the 16th and 17th centuries is crucial, as this was the peak of the European witch trials, a period of mass hysteria where thousands were executed for consorting with the devil, and the werewolf trial was a close cousin to the witch trial. In a world without scientific explanation for disease, famine, or violent crime, the supernatural provided a comforting, if terrifying, answer, as it was easier to blame a demonic pact than to accept the random, chaotic cruelty of nature or the dark potential within humanity itself. Gilles Garnier's case stands out because it is one of the most legally formal and well-documented instances of a state-sanctioned killing for the crime of lycanthropy, where the court transcripts treat the existence of werewolves as a matter of fact, not legend. This was the world our ancestors lived in, a world where the forest held real monsters because they had the official documents to prove it, a world where the legal and theological systems were designed to prosecute the impossible. The pyre in Dôle eventually burned down to ashes and the screams faded from the air. But the shadow of the werewolf of Dôle lingers in our collective imagination, in our fascination with the monster within and the beast that wears a human face. His story is a grim reminder of how fear can warp justice and how a society, gripped by panic, can create the very monsters it seeks to destroy, using legal means to sanction superstition and murder.
The legacy of Gilles Garnier is a complex one, a blend of true crime, folklore, and legal history that challenges our understanding of reality and belief, forcing us to look into the dark corners of human psychology and the terrifying power of collective fear. He remains a permanent fixture in the dark folklore of France, a symbol of the ultimate outsider, the human beast whose story continues to be told not just as a historical curiosity, but as a cautionary tale about the monsters we make. In the end, the story of the Werewolf of Dôle is not about a man who turned into a wolf, but about a community that needed him to be one, a community that could not face the unsettling possibility that the violence came from within their own world, from a man driven by desperation or madness. The real horror may not be the supernatural transformation, but the very human capacity for cruelty, both in the acts of the accused and in the brutal, ritualized response of the society that condemned him, a horror that remains all too familiar,